If you want to know where Bitcoin, Ethereum, and crypto is heading, this is the video for you. Pattern recognition is the highest form of intelligence. We formed a massive upthrust in 2026. We formed a massive upthrust in 2022. We headed into a bear market, formed another upthrust, a dead cat bounce. Everyone right here was saying that we're going to 150 to 200, and this is where I place my shorts. One of my biggest shorts right over here, an upthrust again. Right now we're on the cusp of a drawdown. I'm just showing you the hardcore data, and everyone seems to be fighting it again and again. We've been covering this for the longest, for the very longest. We're not covering this just because everyone else is covering this or everyone else is looking at this fractal. No, we've been covering this from the very peak at top. This is a younger version of me, a younger, more prettier version of me. This was 8 months ago. Bearish, okay? It's actually bearish. It's not bullish, guys. We could do something like this, but we head up higher, and then something like this, guys, yeah? And that's all she wrote. This was a distribution and upthrust in 2026 bear market. In 2022 bear market, likewise, the same happened over here. We kept on bouncing on this diagonal line. Likewise, we headed into this diagonal line. We formed capitulation. This was selling climax. This was selling climax. We're going to dissect this bit by bit, and we're going to zoom in. Now, fractals are just skeletons. They help us navigate through the market. They help us know where we are in the cycle. We have 2026 on my left and we have 2022 on my right. 2026 started from point A. This was selling climax right over here. We headed to the upper area of the range. I've called this point B. Then we've headed into the middle of the range, point C. Then you have D, E at the lower end of the range. Then you have F, G, and H. In 2022, the same thing happened. We had selling climax, which is point A. We headed to the upper area of the range of point B. Further, point C, D, E was the very bottom of these two ranges, followed by F at the higher of the range. Then we got to G right over here, and finally H. At that time, we were anticipating that H will be much lower. We thought it was going to form a lower high. However, this time we formed a higher high, forming a further upthrust. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the upthrust that we've been waiting for. I know some of you struggle with pattern recognition. Some of you are very slow. So I'm going to break this down to you. This period here is playing out the same thing here. There's numerous ways to skin a cat, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to show you something. I've changed the trend line slightly, and it looks almost the same as this over here. We formed a pattern right over here, then formed an upthrust. This was distribution and headed down this diagonal trend line and headed down. Likewise, the same thing is happening. We formed this pattern right over here. We formed an upthrust, ladies and gentlemen, just like we done a few months ago. If it ain't broken, don't try to fix it. We're headed back into this channel. Dare I say, I can even put a miniature trend line right over here. Look at this pretty miniature trend line. Exactly the same as here. We could play out the same thing. We could do the same thing again like this, hover around here, then finally break down. Ultimately, what happened last time was very important. Once we broke this trend line right over here, ladies and gentlemen, well, that was the beginning of the end. Once we break this trend line right over here, ladies and gentlemen, well, you know what happens next. Let's head back to our fractal. And right over here, it was the same thing. This was a trend line right over here. Well, I can move this as well and show you what I mean. From here to here, we had a fractal. From here to here, we had a trend line right over here to there. We can do the same with this one. We can get rid of this trend line. This trend line is very important. If we do not hold, ladies and gentlemen, we break down, well, history is just repeating. If it ain't broken, don't dare to fix it. This is dubious speculation, but let's just say For some strange reason, we feed into some sort of bull case, okay, for the bull tarts. Let's just say we're going to continue to go up. We're going to have a massive rally. Yeah, the only similarities that I can find during the bear market or a mini bear market is this right here. In 2019, we bottomed at $6,429 and we went all the way up to 10,000 US dollars. This was during a miniature bear market and we went up a massive 63%, ladies and gentlemen, just before the biggest or one of the biggest recessions of our lives, COVID-19. We've only seen a massive rally, a gigantic rally in this miniature bear market. Everything else, every other bear market has played out pretty much the same. On Twitter, I've said, beware of the Ides of March. If you know a little bit of history, you know what this means, ladies and gentlemen. And in March, Bitcoin normally peaks. On the 5th of March 2018, we formed an upthrust and headed downwards. On the 21st of March 2002, Bitcoin had a massive peak, a massive upthrust, and from that day it went down a whopping 60%. And on this weekly candle is March the 16th. So I'd say to you, sir, beware of the Ides of March. I know many folks want to fight this bear market. I'm just showing you the data. We have 3 years of bull and 1 year of bear, and every single cycle I see this again and again. They always try to fight it. This is the data of every single bear market. We are on track. There is no deviations. Whatever narrative you believe is not going to change the 4 year cycle. Now, I don't know. It might break this cycle. It might break next cycle. Who knows? But if it ain't broken, don't try to fix it. Let's have a look at Ethereum. This is an upthrust right over here. We formed an upthrust right over here. It was the beginning of the end. We formed another upthrust right over here. We formed another upthrust right over here. We formed a pattern right over here. We hit this trend line right over here and over here. In 2022, we did something similar. We formed a pattern right over here, followed by a diagonal trend line here, followed by another diagonal trend line over here. We formed capitulation. We formed capitulation. As you can see right over here and right over here, the fractals have slightly deviated. We had a massive distribution right over here, an upthrust right over here. In 2022, we didn't form an upthrust. We didn't get to the bull market support band and above it, whereas this got above the bull market support band, got everyone extremely bullish, and we're re-entering this range once again. As you can see, this is a range, and right over here, this is also a range. I think this is clearly a deviation, and this happens in fractals. We just use this just to help us out. It's just a skeleton of where prices will go. I believe we're heading back into the range, and we're going to retest the lower area of the range pretty soon. Well, SPX, I was right. Even the giants will fall. We're underneath the 100 EMA and the 200 EMA. This looks almost identical to this period, Liberation Day. However, I think we got something way more deeper, way more sinister. For now, we're going to compare this cycle to 2022. If things get even worse, ladies and gentlemen, then we're going to start comparing it to something else. We are living in a simulation. In 2022 February, we had the Russia and Ukraine war. After that day, ladies and gentlemen, the S&P 500 went down a whopping 23%. We are living in a simulation. The Iran war started on February the 28th, 2026. And likewise, the Russia and Ukraine war started on the 24th of February 2022. This was the beginning of the Iran conflict right over here, and this was the very beginning of the Russia and Ukraine conflict. We are living in a simulation. I did warn you. I kept on telling you again and again and again, but you didn't want to listen. I said that Bitcoin is a leading indicator. Bitcoin was going sideways for literally 6 months, did nothing. T-bills outperformed Bitcoin. If you don't believe me, I'll go 7 points to tell you why I'm right. Every time oil has gone above this mark, we've seen ourselves in a recession. UBS, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan are all predicting and anticipating if this war continues until June, we're going to see oil prices at $150. I'm not making this up. This is the price of Omani crude oil. It's reached to heights it's never been before. It's sitting at a whopping $173 per barrel. What happens to the rest of the region? What happens? You tell me. That's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. If you like my stuff, join our inner circle. And before I go, taqabbal Allahu minna wa minkum. Eid Mubarak to you and your family. Peace.